everyone. Thank you very much for coming or for joining us from wherever you're joining us from. Maybe just even before we can continue, I would like to bring to your kind attention that this session is being recorded. So in case you are uncomfortable with the recording, you can kindly reach out to us via the messages. Also, for the non-English speaking participants joining us today, kindly note that there are interpretations ongoing, interpretations ongoing in French. So please feel free to turn on the interpretation, to go to the interpretation icon and then choose French if you are from a French-speaking participant. So good afternoon, good morning, and good evening from wherever you're joining us from. And again, very much welcome to today's dialogue. My name is Wanyana Rachel, and I will be moderating today's conversation, which is themed Strengthening the Role of Civil Society Organizations in Monitoring the African Union Continental Results Framework on Women, Peace and Security. And as we all might know, and maybe as also we have seen and indeed proved through different studies on the best practices around women, peace and security, the success of national action plans and indeed any aspirations, be it continental or regional, on women, peace and security cannot be attained without a highly effective monitoring and evaluation mechanisms, but the mechanism or system. But we also have learned that we cannot build such a mechanism without the engagement or involvement of civil society organizations. So we need our civil society organizations to be able to ensure that the women, peace and security monitoring and evaluation mechanisms and systems that are in place are effective, but also that they cater to the needs of the different people across the board, starting right from the grassroots, and also taking into consideration the different vulnerabilities. So today's conversation will be dedicated to unpacking the ways in which we can strengthen this role of civil society in monitoring the African Union Continental Results Framework, which we will maybe also refer to as the CRF as we continue in this conversation on women, peace and security. And for those who might not be very familiar with this framework, it was adopted by the African Union in 2018 with the purpose of ensuring that there is an effective, articulate and organized way of monitoring and reporting on the implementation of the Women, Peace and Security agenda in Africa. So in today's conversations, we hope to reflect on, first of all, how this framework complements other existing monitoring and reporting systems or frameworks on women, peace and security, on the Women, Peace and Security agenda, be it at the national levels or the regional or even the international level. We also hope to have conversations on some of the challenges and the gaps in tracking progress and ensuring accountability for the implementation of the Women, Peace and Security agenda, and also hopefully to understand how the CRF can be used to address these gaps. We also will be drawing on lessons and good practices from the different countries which are at a more advanced level on reporting on the CRF. If I had not mentioned earlier, this is a conversation that has brought people from various countries. We have Burundi represented, we have the DRC, we have South Sudan, we have Uganda, and maybe and some other colleagues from West Africa. So we also hope that through this dialogue, we can be able to provide a platform to promote collaboration between the different actors, because we have civil society organizations represented, but then we also have intergovernmental agencies such as IGAD represented in this conversation. So we hope that we can build these collaborations, which are very, very vital in the implementation or in monitoring the implementation of the Women, Peace and Security agenda in Africa. And with me to unpack this very interesting topic of discussion today, I have a notable panel of experts on women, peace and security, including Mr. Ibrahim Kamara, Dr. Agustino Ting, Professor Sande Okello, Mr. Justin Bahire, and Miss Marie Concessa. And I will invite our panelists in a short while to introduce themselves and also what they do and the institutions which they are representing. But before we go there, I would like to recognize and appreciate the Women's International Peace Center for organizing this workshop. For those who might not know, the Women's International Peace Center is a feminist organization working to ignite women's leadership, to amplify voices of women and deepen their activism in recreating peace. And the Peace Center is operating women, peace and security programs in Africa, the Caucasia, and also Europe. And I should also mention that the Women International Peace Center, yes, sorry, the spotlighting took me off a little. So the Women International Peace Center organized this workshop under the patronage of the Just Future Alliance, which is a consortium of international and regional non-government organizations, but also civil society organizations, research organizations, who work closely with national partners in the Great Lakes region to build a world in which all people in fragile states benefit from accessible, responsive, and accountable security and justice systems. So we recognize and appreciate all the partners under the Just Future Alliance, including the West Africa Network for Peace Building, Search for Common Ground Europe, the CODAID, the Women's International Peace Center, and the African Security Sector Network, which is headquartered in Accra, Ghana. Also, special thanks to Pauline Kahubire, who has done a spectacular job coordinating this engagement and making sure that we are here to have this conversation. Thank you, Pauline. So now I will invite our dear panelists to briefly introduce themselves before we can kick off with the housekeeping rules and then the presentations. You are very much welcome. I'll start with you, Mr. Ibrahim Kamara.
Thank you very much. I am Ibrahim Kamara. I work with the Ministry of Gender and Children's Affairs in Sierra Leone as the Deputy Director of Gender and also the Acting Head of Policy Development, Strategic Planning and Research in the ministry. I currently serve as the WPS focal point and also the National Coordinator for the CRF reporting. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Mr. Kamara. You are very much welcome. We are happy to have you in the room. And next we will have Dr. Agustino Ting.
Very much, and good afternoon, Agustino Ting. Student as a managing director, but I also focus my research partly on gender related issues. Thank you very much.
Well, thank you very much, Dr. Agustino. You're very much welcome. Could we have Miss Marie Concessa? introduce herself, please? If Miss Murray has not joined us yet, can we kindly have Professor Sunday Okello?
Good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen from Addis Ababa. My name is Sunday Okello. I'm conflict analyst for IGAD C1. C1 stands for Conflict Early Warning and Early Response Mechanism. I'm based in Addis Ababa. Very nice to be with you in this forum and discussion. Forward. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Professor, and we are very happy to have you. We hope that Addis is very fine, sunny today, hopefully. And I will welcome Mr. Justin Bahire to also kindly introduce himself. Okay, if we have not yet got Mr. Justin Bahire in the room. Okay, sorry about that. Yes, Mr. Justin Bahire.
Bonjour, je suis Justin Bahire, je suis avocat, je coordonne SOS CJN, SOS Information Juridique Multisectorielle. On est partenaire de Just Future, je suis basé en RDC et présentement à Kinshasa.
Thank you very much, Mr. Bahire. We are very pleased to have you, and our greetings to the people in Kinshasa. Okay, so with those remarks, please allow me to first of all share with you very quickly some of the rules, and I also welcome you to share in the chat some of the rules, the ground rules which you think should underlie or should, which should underlie our space today. First of all, I should emphasize that this is going to be a participatory dialogue. So we hope to hear from you because we are learning from each other. So please feel free to share with us the best practices, the lessons that you have learned in doing the work around women, peace and security, and how it can, so hopefully we can learn from it and be able to cascade it in our respective countries. Also, I encourage us to use respectful language when we, in the event that we disagree, so that we can make the space safe for everyone to participate. With those few rules set, I will kindly invite Mr. Ibrahim Kamara to share with us or to make a presentation on some of the existing monitoring and reporting frameworks on the Women, Peace and Security agenda and how they complement one another. Mr. Kamara, you're very much welcome. The floor is yours.
Yeah, thank you very much, Madam. Let me, on a personal note and also on behalf of the ministry which I represent, extend appreciation to the organizers for giving me this platform to share our thoughts irrespective of the existing WPS monitoring and reporting frameworks and also how they complement each other. Let me also re-echo the points you made about civil society's crucial role in implementing the WPS agenda in Africa. As a country, this is something we acknowledge, even with us, in the development, the implementation, the monitoring, and reporting on the WPS agenda. Civil society is very key and it's playing a crucial role. For this presentation, I want to focus on key 3 things. I want to provide just a brief background introduction to the WPS monitoring and reporting framework, highlight the existing frameworks at global, regional levels, and then speak on how these frameworks complement each other. Of course, following the adoption of the the UN Security Council Resolution 1325 in 2000, there has been several efforts to ensure effective implementation of the WPS agenda through the subsequent adoption of reinforcing and complementary resolutions, adoption of national action plans, and establishment of monitoring and reporting frameworks. Over 20 years since the adoption of the Security Council Resolution 1325, a number of frameworks have been established at global and regional levels to guide the effective implementation, monitoring, and reporting of the WPS agenda. The frameworks are complementary and speak to the core pillars of the WPS agenda. Although there have been several mechanisms to monitor and report on progress in implementing the women's rights agenda generally, of course, we have the CEDAW, which we are obligated as signatories to the CEDAW to periodically submit reports in terms of progress we have made. There's the Beijing also. These are all monitoring frameworks established that even predates the UN Security Council Resolution 1325. So specifically on WPS, not until in 2010, following the adoption of the UN Security Council Resolution 1889 in 2009, do we have a mechanism for monitoring and reporting specifically on WPS. Article 7 of the said resolution, UN Security Council Resolution 1889, requested the Secretary General to submit to the Security Council a set of indicators for tracking the implementation of the Security Council Resolution 1325 by the United Nations entities, member states, and international and regional organizations. Subsequently, a number of frameworks have been established as global, regional, and national levels to monitor and report on the implementation of the WPS agenda. The following slide or section provide a brief background description and scope of the existing frameworks. The first of this framework is the United Nations Global Indicators on Women, Peace, and Security, which is also referred to as a framework to track implementation of Security Council Resolution 1325. This was developed in 2010 by the United Nations Standing Committee on Women, Peace, and Security in response to Resolution 1889. That framework consists of 26 indicators categorized under 4 pillars: prevention, protection, participation, relief, and recovery. United Nations member states are encouraged to consider using these indicators in the implementation of UNHCR 1325. So for those of us who developed first National Action Plan on 1325 before the UNCRA, we use these United Nations Global Indicators on WPS to monitor and report on the implementation of the WPS agenda. So in 2011, since 2011, the UN Security Council Secretary General has been utilizing the indicators to produce the annual report on WPS. So countries were also using the United Nations Global Indicators on WPS until 2011, since 2011. But however, this report, the report that we submitted, countries were submitting using the United Nations Global Indicators on WPS, did not cover all of the indicators. So which is a gap. Following was the indicator for the comprehensive approach to the European Union implementation of UN Security Council Resolution 1325 and 1820 on WPS. The EU adopted a set of 17 indicators in July 2015 to strengthen EU accountability towards implementing its commitment on WPS. The indicators have both an inward and outward outlook. The focus on tracking the EU member states and the EU as an organization which implementing the WPS agenda. 2 reports were produced using these indicators in May 2011 and February 2014. The second part of February 2014, the second report of 2014, recommended the revision of the 17 indicators to incorporate lessons learned and strengthen how the EU's and member states work on UN Security Resolution 1325 is measured. Consequently, on 20th September 2016, the EU adopted a new set of indicators, expanding the original 17 to 21. This framework adopted the 4 pillars of UNSCR 1325. Then is the global network of women peace builders civil society indicators. The global network of women peace builders is a program of the International Civil Society Action Network, which is a coalition of civil society and women's organizations from Africa, Asia, the Pacific, Latin America, Eastern and Western Europe. So in 2010, the coalition launched its civil society monitoring report on the implementation of UNSCR 1325. The civil society monitoring project began with a list of initially 1,500 indicators, which were later cut down to 80 and then currently 16. The 16 indicators were piloted in 2010 and 2011 in selected countries across the globe. In 2012, the indicators were revised again to a core set of 11, incorporating the lessons learned during their implementation in the 2 previous years. Unlike the United Nations and EU indicators that are categorized under the 4 pillars of Resolution 1325, the global network of GNWP indicators are grouped into 3 things: participation, prevention, and protection, with a final pillar pertaining to promotion of the gender perspective. Now to the AU Continental Results Framework on WPS. This was adopted by the AU Peace and Security Council during its 772nd meeting on 16 May 2018. The development of the CRF recognizes that while several commitments towards the WPS agenda have been adopted at continental, regional, and national levels in Africa, the continent has not established measures to ensure effective assessment of and reporting on the delivery of this commitment. The AU-CRF complements the AU agenda specifically around gender, peace, and security by providing a means for monitoring and reporting on how specific gender goals and actions under different aspirations have been implemented. It contributes to data collection and informed peace and security decisions. The CRF has 2 main objectives. First is to institutionalize a regular and systematic monitoring and reporting on the implementation of the WPS agenda in Africa, and secondly, to strengthen accountability for the implementation of the WPS agenda in Africa. The CRF is structured around 4 pillars of the WPS with 28 user-friendly indicators. 5 pillars, 5 indicators for the prevention pillar, 5 for the protection, 11 for the participation pillar, and 7 indicators for the relief and recovery. Additionally, there is a theme on women with WPS in emerging security threats, which allows for reporting on how WPS is being integrated in emerging security threats. In the current reporting period, countries were under AU-CRF were required to submit also a report, to report on the indicators that deals with COVID-19 and other emergencies. Lately, in March 2021, there is the Women, Peace and Security Humanitarian Action Compact. It is one of the key outcomes of the Generation Equality Forum held in Mexico in March 2021. Of course, it is an intergenerational inclusive movement for action on women, peace and security, and gender equality in humanitarian action. The compact focused on the implementation of existing commitments on the WPS and humanitarian action by establishing a voluntary monitoring and accountability process to realize existing WPS H4A commitments, strengthen coordination across existing WPS HA mechanisms, systems, network, partnership, and capacities, promoting financing for and wider awareness and visibility of the women, peace, and security agenda and gender equality in humanitarian action. Now, in terms of the complementarity, how these frameworks complement each other, we must understand firstly that these frameworks progressively build on each other. I will give you an instance. The AU-CRF reflects the realities of, though the AU-CRF reflects the realities of the African continent, and extensive in terms of indicators, it is, however, anchored in the WPS agenda reflected in all the other frameworks. The UN, the EU, the GNWP frameworks reflect the 4 cardinal pillars of the women, peace, and security. So the AU-CRF, though it's built on this framework, it also reflects the WPS pillars, which are inherent in all the other frameworks. Moreover, unlike the AU, UN, and EU frameworks, which are mainly state-focused, if you look at the GNWP framework, it acknowledges and provides a platform for non-state actors, I mean civil society and NGOs involvement in monitoring and reporting on the WPS agenda at national and global levels. This complements the role is crucial for the effective monitoring and reporting of the WPS agenda at country, state, and global levels. For a more comprehensive assessment of the implementation of the WPS agenda, it is important to reflect on all the existing frameworks. The AUCRF has, in its nature and scope, established strong synergies with other existing frameworks. It builds on and complements existing frameworks on WPS, mindful of the realities of the African continent. I want to stop here. I will encourage, if you have questions or clarification, you're most welcome. Thank you for your attention.
Thank you very much, Mr. Ibrahim, for that very detailed and insightful presentation. If you have any questions, please do prepare them. I will request, Pauline, that later in the conversation we have people ask their questions or even share their thoughts on the different presentations. There is a lot indeed that has been said by Ibrahim, and it raises some questions also for me, because I realize there are many frameworks which are already in place. But many times for me, the question is, when we talk about civil society and engaging civil society, whom are we talking about specifically? Because many times we have formalized the definition of civil society, leaving out some of the most important people on the ground or at the grassroots, whose voices would be very important in improving the different initiatives which are adopted by the state actors or even by the different actors in implementing the Women, Peace and Security agenda. But those are some of the things which we'll reflect on. I also had questions on the synergies, strengthening the synergies between these different frameworks, because you realize they are many at the global level, and then you come down at the regional level. And how we are making sure that we know what's going on with the different frameworks and be able to report on them as civil society. Those are some of the things to reflect on. Without any further ado, I will also invite Dr. Agustino Ting to make his presentation on the challenges and gaps in tracking progress and ensuring accountability for the implementation of the Women, Peace and Security agenda. He will also be talking to us on how the CRF can be used to address these lingering or persisting gaps. Dr. Ting, sorry, you are very much welcome.
Thank you very much, Rachel, and I appreciate the invitation to be here. I am not going to be on the video because my bandwidth here is somewhat limited. If it's okay with the attendees, I will just speak and not use the video. Would have been nice to do so. But again, I am thankful that I was invited to participate in such an important discussion with respect to women, peace, and security on the continent. I'm asked to focus on challenges and gaps. So what I have done so far is to outline some of this in the context of South Sudan, and a bit of examples coming from the regional context. So Rwanda, Kenya, or South Africa, some of these countries would be brought forward in the presentation that I have. So first off, as this discussion concerns the role of civil society in monitoring and evaluating the CRFs, I wanted to make sure that the emphasis is made on challenges that they face as institutions concerned with this role, but also general challenges facing the systems across the board. So then we are not just looking at civil society in isolation, but from a perspective of systemic issues that are affecting the continent and individual countries. So let me put it this way. So in the context of South Sudan, we have civil society institutions that are involved in both research and advocacy. But what is quite clear in the work that these institutions do is that there is quite a bit of misunderstanding at the local levels what those policies are or what those plans are trying to achieve. And as a result, normally as a civil society institution trying to track these outcomes, the general society isn't really cooperating because there is a limited understanding of why these policies exist, because some of them, remember, are extracted from regional and international settings. And so applying them to the local context becomes an issue, because then you need an education, which is not present so far in South Sudan, on why these frameworks or plans exist. So there is a ubiquitous local misunderstanding of those plans and policies. So that's one issue that would need to be emphasized in the context of the role of civil society. The second challenge is that there is a general disinterest in science. I say this in the context of South Sudan. I have also seen it in the regional context. So you have the countries where you'd find little political will in terms of accommodating science to be able to tease out evidence related to progress being made in specific areas. And as a result, there's limitation in terms of data that would be used to actually track those specific milestones with respect to women, peace and security. Even if you have a policy in place, there will be lack of interest across the board for you to do science. For example, in the context of South Sudan, over the years at the Student Institute, we have been wanting to establish a database with respect to women participation in the political leadership in the country. And quite interestingly, the government, you have the ministry that is concerned with this, and then you have the international partners. The government, the ministry concerned is actually quite receptive. But then you have these other layers that actually support the ministry that are not necessarily interested. And partly because science doesn't seem to be understood yet and the use of it. And even going as far as the UN agencies, the UN Women, for example, has not been able to work or cooperate with science-related institutions in the country to generate evidence over time to feed into the policy. And of course, there's politics in everything, and gender equality programs are politicized in a number of contexts. In South Sudan, gender equality programs are seen as international programs, and that they are not locally desired. So you will find ministers who would supposedly be promoting this, saying they will just do whatever it takes because international is demanded, but then they don't feel the vested interest to pursue this as ministers. And that's fundamentally problematic in terms of implementing the policies themselves, but also trying to work with institutions that would help you in generating data, monitoring, and evaluating those frameworks in place. And that feeds into the issue of funding. So you would expect such programs to be funded in terms of developing the frameworks for monitoring and evaluating those programs. And in this case, we're not talking about what the international community currently does, and that is normally confusing impact evaluation with more of a formative operational evaluations, which basically just tells you what has been done, where the money has gone, but it doesn't really tell you what impact has been created if you were to invest $50,000 in the context of South Sudan in understanding leadership transitions in our case, for example. And so there are limited resources for robust systems of evaluation and monitoring to be established. And this applies to both the international community as well as the government. And then you have weak and politicized civil society institutions. You would find in the context of South Sudan, some of the civil society institutions are focused on advocacy, and that advocacy is not even informed, it's not properly informed. And you would find some of this institution being captured by political parties. That makes it difficult for them to be independent and to put out evidence-based policy recommendation. And lastly, the biggest challenge in the context of South Sudan is the absence of political will, especially with respect to the political leadership in furthering the objectives of women, peace, and security in the country. Now, let me get into the gaps. And I have decided to just focus on participation of women. The So the policies that we're talking about, both local and international, are barely implemented. And that is a problem in two ways. One is that if your interest is to realize results towards this objective, you're not going to see that happening. The second issue is that when there is lack of implementation of site programs, there is interest to invest in frameworks that would evaluate the results. Because then if there is an evaluation, the evaluation is going to point to negative results. And so politically, people don't feel comfortable with investing in site programs, right? So the lack of implementation of the policies feeds into the absence of resources for science work, for example, to be able to understand what has been achieved and what hasn't. And South Sudan is a good place for that. South Sudan introduced recently a new quota framework for women participation in the political leadership. And this was an extension of the 25% that was allocated by the SPLM long before the peace agreement came to South Sudan in 2005. What is interesting in this is that the 25% allocation or quota was never actually fully implemented. There were glaring gaps all over the place, and the Institute actually had conducted a couple of studies into that policy, and we recommended that more work needed to be done. Nevertheless, the international community pushed for more representation in the system. And the question that I was asking is, why would you expect just increasing the numbers is going to lead to positive results in the policy implementation? It just doesn't make sense to me, because if the initial plan, which was instituted by the governing party, which brought about peace in the country, hasn't been implemented, then what makes you think that what is coursed upon this parties that recently were embroiled in conflict is going to result in positive outcomes? And so again, as I challenged them when the new policy was introduced, what we have realized today is that the 35% has not been implemented actually, and you can see that across the board. I mean, if you look at the governors, we have 10 states and 3 administrative areas, and out of 10 states, there's only 1 female governor. So that's 10% as opposed to 25%. And then, of course, this is not to say there are no success stories on the continent. So you have South Africa that's making progress. You have Rwanda making progress. You have Kenya that has come a long way as well, and it's making progress. Ethiopia is doing wonderfully, as we have seen recently with the new prime minister. But what is clear is that much of Africa remains bound in terms of implementing this policy, even though we have a few countries that have done so. With that, I want to bring to your attention some of the policy pointers that I think might be useful in promoting the WSPS agenda on the continent. Number one is that I think what needs to happen, and it should be internalized locally, is that you need, as an individual country or institution concerned with gender-related issues, to develop some matrices which would set timelines and also indicators that are localized, as opposed to focusing largely on what the continent or the international community puts out there. It would be good to localize those and redevelop the matrices and indicators that are suitable for the local context. This so far isn't really happening, and one can easily do that by just looking at political appointments in the context of women's participation. In South Sudan, it could be easily tracked at the state level as well as the national level over time. In 2019, the Student Institute proposed to UN Women to actually develop what we call the Women Data Tracking System. And we proposed getting some funding, and the Institute established what's called the Data Hub here for the national data system. And we wanted this women leadership tracking database to be here. And fortunately, as I spoke to the issues of political will, both at the international and local level, we were not able to get reception with respect to that. But that would be essential. And essential in the sense that you empower civil society institutions to do the work, as opposed to developing some ad hoc programs or evaluations that are normally put in the drawers, do not see the light of the day after the international original consultant has shown up and produced those reports and basically disappears into the thin air. Those reports use resources, but they are not impactful. So we thought it would be essential to have a record keeping system in terms of political leadership or any other indicator with respect to women, and done by research institutions and not just individual consultants. The civil society would also need to increase their effort towards self-empowerment. In this case, not relying too much on advocacy approaches, but also thinking of ways to develop tools that are science-driven in order to inform their advocacy exercises. Civil society in South Sudan is largely political. It's not very technical. And that's because they have not invested enough time and resources to basically learn the technical skills to be able to generate evidence and use that to inform policies in the country. So civil society strengthening and having a focus on that would be quite useful in this respect. And then you have the regional and international frameworks that I think are an effort at babysitting individual governments. It's okay to learn from the regions, it's okay to learn from continental frameworks, but I think the governments, our own governments, would need to be made to understand that it is their responsibility to invest in their own frameworks, generate their own localized matrices, and advance them without being told to do A, B, and C, which in my opinion amounts to that babysitting. Again, there is need for independence in terms of furthering this agenda, but that is not to say that we should not draw from international or regional support, because there are capacity deficits. There should be resources to basically revamp local efforts at doing that. So thank you very much. I'll leave it at that.
Okay, very interesting take from Dr. Agustino. Thank you very much, Doctor. I hope that our participants have picked a few things here and there. And for me, what stood out was the need to develop the indicators which are localized. And I feel that this is very important, because we cannot import peace from outside. It must be built from within the societies. And where we allow communities to participate in defining their problems that they are facing, and also the solutions that they feel are well suited within their context, then there will be a higher sense of responsibility and ownership of these solutions. So it's very, very indeed important to localize this agenda. Also, another thing that stood out was the issue of political will. And I hope that we can have further conversations on this, because very often when we are having these conversations, it comes up that there is no political will, or that the political will is low. But if we are having more than 30 countries on the continent which have adopted the Women, Peace and Security agenda, and also developed national action plans for implementation of this agenda, then where does the low political will come in? Is it a question of resources? Is it a question of gender norms that are, quite hesitant to accept the meaningful and active participation of women in peace processes? These are some of the things that we might need to break down or unpack in this conversation. But before we go to more of those conversations, I would like to invite Miss Marie Concessa. I don't know if she has joined the chat, and she will also be sharing with us some of the challenges and the gaps in tracking progress on accountability for the implementation of the Women, Peace and Security Agenda, particularly from the perspective of Burundi. So Ms. Marie Concessa, if you are in the chat, kindly, the floor is yours.
Oh, bonjour tout le monde. Bonjour.
Good morning, Marie. We hear you perfectly well.
Bonjour tout le monde. Bonjour tout le monde. Est-ce que vous m'entendez? Bonjour. Ça va? Ok, merci beaucoup. Bonjour tout le monde. Vraiment, je m'excuse de m'avoir rejoint à l'équipe un peu tardivement à cause de la connexion. Mon nom, c'est Marie Concessa Barouik. Je travaille pour une organisation locale, Association des femmes rapatriées du Burundi, qui est en partenariat avec Cordaid dans la mise en œuvre du projet Just Future, Avenir Juste. C'est un plaisir de partager avec vous quelques défis, quelques lacunes dans le monitoring de la mise en œuvre de la R1325. Je voudrais également vous dire que je fais partie du Comité national de pilotage de la mise en œuvre de la résolution 1325. Ce que je vais vous présenter, c'est d'abord le contexte, le Burundian contexte, le contexte de la mise en œuvre de la résolution 1325. Et après, je vais vous présenter les quelques défis et les lacunes dans le suivi et le monitoring. Le Burundi vient de se doter du 3e plan d'action de la R1325. Donc, c'est la génération, c'était 2012 et 2016. La deuxième, 2017-2021. Et la troisième, c'est 2022-2027, qui est axée sur 6 axes. Et c'est bien sûr un plan d'action qui a été élaboré conjointement avec différents précédents plans d'action, qui a montré que le défi majeur sur lequel il faut mettre beaucoup d'efforts, c'est la faible capacité économique de la femme pour réaliser son potentiel dans la participation dans la consolidation de la paix et dans les instances de prise de décision. Le PAN, comme les autres PAN, a des indicateurs. Les indicateurs que moi je considère que ce sont des indicateurs de mise en œuvre des activités et que le contexte régional, national et international devait penser beaucoup aux indicateurs d'impact sur les communautés IPC, sur comment localiser l'agenda femmes. Parce que pour nous, dans le cadre de la mise en œuvre de Just Future, nous voulons que nous espérons que l'agenda femmes, paix, sécurité doit être observé au niveau local dans les 4 piliers. Au niveau contextuel également, le Burundi a un comité national de pilotage, mais aussi un comité technique chargé du suivi des activités du comité de pilotage. Au niveau de la participation, nous pouvons considérer qu'il y a quand même des améliorations au niveau du pouvoir législatif et exécutif dans la prise de décision et au niveau communal, avec 30% déjà dans le cadre légal. Mais quand même, une faible représentativité et une faible représentativité des postes non électifs. Vous pouvez avancer avec le slide suivant, avec le slide suivant, mais également avec the next slide, le slide suivant, s'il vous plaît. OK, merci beaucoup. Au niveau du relèvement économique, le Burundi, quand même, a montré une volonté politique dans la mise en œuvre d'une stratégie nationale de renforcement des capacités des femmes, renforcement des capacités économiques, mais également avec la Banque des femmes nouvellement créée. Parce que, comme je vous l'ai dit, le défi vraiment majeur qui a été démontré, c'est la faible capacité économique. Mais au niveau, on dit à une loi sur la prévention et la lutte.
Miss Mary, you could maybe switch off your video. Oh dear. Okay, Miss Mary, can you hear us? Hello, Miss Mary.
Quels sont les défis qui ont été que je peux vous partager? Il y a la communication verticale et horizontale pour partager les résultats, les défis, les leçons apprises. Ça, c'est un grand défi. Mais également, il y a la vulgarisation elle-même du PAN, la mise en place d'une stratégie de communication sur la mobilisation des fonds. Il y a également les mécanismes de veiller à ce que la résolution soit partie intégrante de toutes les politiques et dans tous les départements ministériels, mais également par tous les acteurs. Ça, c'est vraiment un autre défi. Vous pouvez aller avec le slide suivant. Vous pouvez aller avec le slide suivant. Est-ce que vous m'entendez? OK. La mise en place également des mécanismes qui permettent une opérationnalisation effective du comité de pilotage de la R1325. Oui, je vous dis que je fais partie du comité de pilotage de la R1325, mais vraiment l'opérationnalisation du comité, c'est un grand défi. Un autre défi, une autre lacune, c'est assurer le suivi régulier des activités des différents intervenants sur la mise en œuvre de la résolution 1325. Un autre défi, c'est impliquer tous les acteurs concernés dans tous les processus, que ce soit surtout au niveau de la planification, au niveau du suivi et au niveau de l'évaluation. Oui, il y a certains partenaires qui sont impliqués quand on fait la planification du PAN, mais là maintenant, ce ne sont pas tous les partenaires. Il faut vraiment identifier la majorité des partenaires qui pourraient financer, qui pourraient contribuer dans la mise en œuvre et le suivi. Un autre défi, ce sont les fonds qui sont alloués au plan d'action de la R1325 qui est minime. Mais également, c'est un défi aussi d'existence de mapping exhaustif des bailleurs de fonds potentiels des plans d'action nationaux et les partenaires de résolution 1325 pour la mise en place d'un basket fund pour la mise en œuvre de la résolution 1325. Et enfin, c'est assurer la coordination effective des interventions. Et ça, c'est très important. pour pouvoir documenter tout ce qui est en train d'être fait à travers les 4 piliers de la R1325, il faut s'assurer du niveau de mise en œuvre de chaque pilier et de tous les indicateurs. Et ici, je voulais mettre un accent particulier sur les indicateurs de changement au niveau communautaire. Voilà, mesdames et messieurs qui me suivaient, les quelques obstacles, les quelques défis que j'ai considérés très importants au niveau de notre pays, pourquoi pas au niveau de la région des Grands Lacs, dans le cadre de la mise en œuvre de la résolution 1325. Je vous remercie.
Thank you very much. Thank you very much, Ms. Marie Concessa, for that presentation. And I would like to remind the participants that in case you have any questions or any comments, please let me know. And in a few minutes, we will be opening up the flow for you to share your thoughts. With those remarks from Ms. Marie Concessa, all the way from Burundi, sharing with us the challenges and the gaps in tracking the progress and ensuring accountability for the implementation of the Women, Peace and Security agenda. And you realize that from the different presenters actually that have already spoken, many of the challenges and the gaps are very much similar. So very different contexts, but the concerns, the issues are very, very, very much the same when we talk about issues of localization, effective coordination, funding. It seems that we all have the same challenges, and possibly having such spaces as this where we talk about the most effective way forward will be very, will be key, or will help us to pave a way for successful implementation or even tracking of the progress of the Women, Peace and Security agenda. So I would like to invite Professor Sunday Okello to speak to us on the lessons and good practices from countries which are at a more advanced level of reporting on the CRF. Professor Sunday, you are very much welcome. The floor is yours.
Thank you very much once again, ladies and gentlemen. I want to thank the organizers of this important forum and platform to discuss the issues around the Continental Framework that helps us to monitor the work of women and peace and security in the continent. I also want to reiterate and thank very much Ibrahim for the background information that he has given us. I started following these lessons learned from the onset of the establishment of the framework from June 2018, where 23 countries, African member states, have actually adopted this to their national action plan and started working with it. From 2018, we are looking at about 4 years down the line, and this is a point that requires a very critical analysis on the monitoring of the implementation of the framework. I have heard my colleagues already talked quite a lot. It's very difficult to readjust my presentation or my thoughts after many have already mentioned some of the things I wanted to say. So I wouldn't want to repeat some of this information again. It will take time for nothing, really. I'm looking at a couple of things here. CRF is an African entity. It is an African entity which is embedded in previous policies and platforms and frameworks, agendas. So it is not a new thing. It is to be put in practice. It is simplified. It has to make the implementation easier. It has gone to the extent of even listing down indicators where possible that could be used for monitoring. So to me, this is a very important framework that should not have taken us many years, like any other policy frameworks, like APSA, African Peace and Security Architecture, and like any other frameworks and policies that the continent has been developing. So for me, I look at this WPS agenda in Africa to really capitalize on, number one, where the difficulties, the experiences that are shown all over the continent, across the continent, is about on the reforms of laws. The reforms of laws and how the framework fits into the laws, and how the laws pick up this implementation and brings it back for realization for gender, women, peace and security in the continent. Some of the laws have become very rigid and not flexible enough to embrace this framework and its implementation. Another is the conflicting policies. Lessons that have been learned show that so many policies, the multitude, the plethora of policies, which are both at the national and the continental or regional REX level, do contradict and also sometimes complement each other. But the interpretation of some of these policies become difficult, and therefore governments tend to stick with their policies, they tend to stick with their laws, and they tend to stick with their frameworks that they have. Another is the institutions. The institutions, current institutions, ministries, departments, and all that are also very rigid. If you take the police, the military, Ministry of Gender will be working around the clock to make sure that this policy is embedded in all these institutions, but still the progresses are slow across the continent. Some countries have really done very well. I'll mention some of them later, but other countries are really struggling to make sure that some of the institutions are gender balanced, for example, and are applying CRF for monitoring and reporting. When we look at the regional bodies, at the place where I'm sitting within the IGAD, every unit within IGAD has a gender representative. We have a gender focal point. Every office that we have here. However, it is of gender representation and in the interpretation of the 1325, which applies now within the IGAD. Everybody, everywhere in their respective places have a gender focal point. However, the implementation of CRF for itself, for monitoring, is very minimal. It means we know about the gender issues, but we don't go extra mile to monitor, to find out and check whether or not some of the indicators in CRF are being implemented. The other week, 2-3 weeks ago, I was in Ghana, Accra, trying to bring all these issues also together on making sure that we bring some new thinking into the African Union post-conflict and reconstruction, post-conflict reconstruction and development policy framework to be reviewed and make sure that we put more pillars or we reinforce more pillars into the policy framework. And we came up with climate security issues, including women in that. And then we separated the pillars that now stand alone for women in post-conflict reconstruction continentally. We realized that the CRF was not even mentioned anywhere in terms of monitoring the activities that include women in post-conflict setting. So I would say even at the continental level, we're still struggling with the implementation of CRF to make sure that the indicators for monitoring and reporting are actually up to date and recorded. We reviewed a couple of weeks ago, we reviewed the mechanisms that are used continentally, the African peer review system, to check and see whether or not they capture issues of gender mainstreaming and CRF for itself, where issues of gender are monitored and reported appropriately, both from the local, national, regional, and continental level. We found that the African peer review is also inadequately capturing some of these. And why that is happening is that probably people have not taken CRF seriously to the extent that they use it as a tool for bringing out issues that are pertinent to women, peace and security in the continent. I would also look at, as I said, the Agenda 2060 really is a huge agenda which embraces quite a number of issues, including women, peace and security. However, it looks like we have not yet moved to the pace that we have really wanted. And the goodwill of the W and the CRF was that it could enhance and make it speedy enough so that Agenda 2063 is realized, and we have quite a number of issues to report on gender-specific issues, the goals and actions, and the different aspirations which have been implemented. But however, we are still far away from that in almost everywhere in the continent. I'm giving a general view. Now, let me just look at some of the problems that the framework actually tries to demonstrate and consistently hitting the wall, that it is becoming difficult. I've heard my colleagues talking about political will. I would disagree with the word political will. There is quite a lot of political will along the continent, all over in the continent, the member states. One of the examples that there is a political will is the ability to accept and put up the framework and make sure that it is existing. The ability to make sure that if you look at Uganda today, the new cabinet, the prime minister is a woman, and ministers, many women are appointed to the ministerial positions. We are waiting for Kenya. South Africa has women. We have Rwanda that has been in the limelight of representation of women. South Sudan, I applaud South Sudan very well, because they had been implementing 1325 under UN Women and all that. And in Parliament, they made sure that the 35% threshold was met. And they work at it all the way from the national, the Juba administration, all the way down to the states level. So we are looking at Sudan, women representation in changing and making sure they participate in civil society organizations and making sure that the regime is changed, and not only changed, the coalition composes of women and civil society groups. When we look at Botswana, look at Lesotho, now if we go to Somalia after the election, women are now coming into the limelight. There is, what I'm trying to say here is there is political will. What probably is not there is, what makes it look like there's no political will is the political bureaucracy. I would rather call it political bureaucracy. In every corridor of the society, of offices, you would find this political bureaucracy, but the understanding that there must be a representation of women and gender-sensitive programming in all departments is very much, people are very much aware of it. There is the political will, there is a lot of political bureaucracy along that. That is the problem when you now begin to talk about the implementation of CRF. You will not move a distance, not because there is no political will, but because there is too much political bureaucracy along the line. Another issue is the resourcing, financing. I would have loved CRF to also include in its indicators very succinctly that we include the CRF in the national budgets and through ministries of gender and equality and all that, wherever we are. It is there, but there is no proper follow-up. These are the budgets that are cancelled at the very earliest in the review of the national budget before they are presented to Parliament, accountability are left to experts' opinion, are not succinctly put on the ground and say, yes, we are accountable to the failures or to the implementation of CRF. Everybody is aloof, is like, it is not me. So there are so many bystanders in looking at CRF. There are so many people who would only want to watch, is a watch and see, let's see game, which basically affects implementations. I want to also talk about issues of inclusivity, equity, and non-discrimination in addressing conflicts. CRF has not been very effective in areas where conflict has been, in terms of looking at how inclusive women are in making sure that peace processes include women. In some instances, yes, women are included. If I look at the Tigray region of Ethiopia, where people are suffering, the peace agreement, peace talks is being put together. Our hope is that at least women should be represented, because quite a number of women have suffered in that region. If you look at now the situation in Burkina Faso, where coups are being generated one after the other, women and children are suffering. And there is no mention anywhere where at least the CRF monitoring and reporting along the lines of where conflict is taking place, war is taking place. At least I'm happy that I see that happening in Sudan. The women of Sudan are very active and they report incidences which actually happen on a daily basis. During those demonstrations from 2018, 2019, that brought to the ouster of Omar al-Bashir from power until today. Al-Burhan has finally even bowed down, at least to accept that the military may not be able to be fully in control of the government, but allow the civilian population. But these are peer pressures, including women, and their mechanisms for reporting is very good. When we look at Nigeria, of course, very good. We had some discussions with WANEB and other organizations. When we were in Accra, as I said last week, there were quite a number of women who came and civil society organizations who represented the views of West African women associations and gender issues to be included in the discussions that affect women in peace and security, especially in post-conflict setting. Then when we talk about non-discrimination in the policy itself, there is quite a number of issues that still we would love to allow this CRF to actually follow. I give a very micro example in the region, in IGAD region, where 70% of the population are pastoralists or semi-pastoralists. And we're looking at a pastoral community who are under stress because of climate change and a lot of conflicts in the region. On that basis, we have a lot of women who actually suffer in this situation. And women are not treated equally. It's still very far, and there's no mention anywhere in this kind of setting where CRF would have monitored and reported issues of equity, issues of inclusivity, issues of non-discrimination to address women who are in conflict. Another thing that I would like to talk about is actually to get into the indicators themselves. The indicators themselves, let me start with prevention. I work directly with issues of prevention, conflict prevention, which is under conflict early warning and early response mechanism for IGAD. As a conflict analyst, I oversee these situations on a daily basis. I look at these issues on a daily basis. However, CRF would have made a very substantive contribution to the work that we already do, because we have indicators that collect and put together information about conflict, women in conflict, post-conflict setting, prevention, and so forth. There are quite a number of indicators that we have developed. And some of these indicators overlap with what CRF is actually as listed down. Now, the modalities for which this regional framework and regional bodies could use and combine and check whether CRF is actually picking from us, it's still not there. We're looking at our own system, our own reporter system, which collects data from the entire region. And we have that. Now it comes to analysis and the interpretation, implementation of the data in terms of policies, in terms of actions and preventions. It is not there. If it is there, it is minimal, and it is in the interest of the governments to either use the information and apply it in their own way. As I mentioned in the beginning, that the priorities of prevention and intervention is with the national. Regional bodies have very little say, except if we look at the intervention from ECOWAS is more pronounced compared to IGAD, where regional bodies are able to move into a country with a force and dictate terms for resignation of a colonel who has taken over government by coup. We don't have that in IGAD. We probably have East African Standby Force. We don't have that in SADC. We don't have that in COMESA. And if we do, we probably even don't consider to the extent where CRF is established to look into issues of reporting and implementation. However, prevention is already out there in the pillars that we have. That is prevention pillar under number 4, existence, evidence of WPS perspective in a continental early warning systems. I want to emphasize that, because if we don't put the women in that, we don't put this policy into that, the framework into that, we still fail one of those pillars. Then again, we have under the protection pillar, the measures that are taken by AU to protect the rights of women in refugee and IDP camps. I mentioned some of the countries. We are now experiencing quite a number of refugees from South Sudan to Sudan who are also in Chad. We have so many refugees in Mali. 2 years ago, I was in Bamako and visited some of these refugee camps, and with very many nationals. We have so many refugees in Libya. We have so many refugees who are trying to cross from other continental areas, Libya and to Djibouti through Obok to Saudi Arabia and Yemen. We have so many refugees in Uganda from South Sudan. We have so many refugees in Ethiopia, from Eritrea and from Somalia, and so forth. I can mention many, many, many. However, the relief and recovery issues and the instruments that are supposed to be used for improving integration are all still requiring that we scale up the WPS framework, which is very minimal in many, many cases. And in any case, we see many of these people who are in refugee camps are women and children. So when we look at another pillar, which is basically the protection of women and girls from violence, including sexual and gender-based violence, WPS still also needs to do more, because we still have many, many, many of these, especially during the time of COVID-19. When COVID hit and lockdowns, we experienced continentally an increased numbers of young girls who are molested sexually early teen pregnancies, dropouts from schools, early marriages, and so many child mortality based on immaturity of these young girls, and they are not able to go back to schools anymore. And we have experienced this. It has become almost a tradition where girls have gotten into a new culture of cohabiting with young boys. And we have experienced now young parents in the continent. And WPS is well suited for reporting on this. We have not got enough data on this through the framework, WPS framework. So all over, now we have continuing conflicts in Libya. We are not getting any data from Libya on all this. I mentioned already Burkina Faso, Guinea, countries which are actively in conflict. We are not getting data from that. And then we have another issue on numbers of women CSOs who are participating in government-led peace building processes. We have quite a number in the continent. I was amazed when I saw quite a number of women representation in Ghana in making sure that this post-conflict and post-conflict reconstruction development framework of the African Union is reviewed, and we upscale it and had more pillars. So many women and CSOs came, and others were online and gave their views. So I think in terms of security sector reform, they are there, although not many. In terms of dialogues, there are so many women and organizations that are actually participating. As I said, in Uganda, we have quite a number of representatives. In Ethiopia, we have quite a lot. In Rwanda, we have a lot. Burundi has come in now. DRC, Eastern DRC, the situation is there, and we need to find more opportunities to record information from East. Look at Chad. Chad has also quite a number of issues. Look at Nigeria, Ghana, and the West African countries fairly doing well. However, it is not adequate. Last but not least, I would want to really thank my previous speakers because they highlighted quite a number of issues which the framework is actually telling us to do. However, I would love that this framework should increase on the numbers of indicators, should go under review, should be embedded in the African peer review system, should also include youth and make it more operational, and should create departments at the African Union that particularly looks at the implementation of this framework. I want to stop here. I've not mentioned any particular lessons learned, but I've generally looked at the continent as a whole, because some of my colleagues have already spoken on their specific lessons learned. So I would rather reserve the rest for questions and answers. Thank you very much. I would like to stop here. Thank you.
Thank you very much indeed, Professor. We very much appreciate your presentation, very detailed. And I know that there were many lessons that were picked by our dear participants. And right now, I will invite our last speaker for the day before we go into questions, Mr. Justin Bahire, to talk on how to promote collaboration between various actors to support the implementation of the CRF and strengthen accountability for the implementation of the Women, Peace and Security Agenda. Mr. Bahire, you are very much welcome. And in the meantime, I encourage all of us to prepare our questions, our comments, because we will be opening up the floor after Mr. Bahire. Mr. Bahire, in the meantime, the floor is yours. Okay.
Si Bayré est là, merci beaucoup, madame, pour cette occasion d'échanger avec les partenaires sur comment promouvoir la collaboration entre les différents acteurs pour soutenir la mise en œuvre du cadre d'orientation des résultats, les CRF, et renforcer la responsabilité et la mise en œuvre de l'agenda. Alors, je vais évoquer brièvement les contextes de travail des organisations en RDC. Je vais aussi toucher un tout petit peu les avancées par rapport à l'agenda Femmes, Paix et Sécurité et évoquer quelques défis, peut-être consécutivement, quelques recommandations qui permettraient d'améliorer le travail. Alors, le contexte de la RDC est celui qui est déjà suffisamment connu par tout le monde. Il est dominé par l'activisme des groupes armés. Nous sommes les pays qui a maintenant plus d'armées du monde, que ce soit au niveau de la mission des Nations Unies pour la stabilisation plutôt en RDC, qu'on appelle la MONUSCO, que ce soit au niveau de la East Africa Community, qu'on vient d'adhérer actuellement. Vous avez entendu que toutes les armées de la East Africa Community vont venir à l'Est, en RDC. Il y en a déjà qui sont là, les Burundais. Les compatriotes burundais sont déjà sur notre sol. Les Ougandais sont là depuis plusieurs mois. Les Tanzaniens y étaient déjà à travers même la MONUSCO. C'est ça le contexte en général. Le pays est confronté à des difficultés majeures de guerre, des attaques armées. Il y a même plusieurs groupes armés à l'interne, des résistances, mais au finish, ça crée de l'insécurité. Et cette insécurité a des conséquences majeures sur le travail, sur la paix, sur la sécurité de la femme et des jeunes filles. Les viols dans le contexte de la RDC est souvent utilisé comme arme de guerre. Mais au finish, tout le monde sent que le problème qui se pose en RDC est lié plutôt aux ressources humaines, aux ressources naturelles. Il y a un combat aujourd'hui avec les changements climatiques qui affectent sensiblement les conditions de travail, même sanitaires de la femme et de la jeune fille. Et tout le monde nous montre que la RDC est un pays solution. Il y a la pré-COP qui vient d'être organisée à Kinshasa dans le cadre de ce processus. Et malheureusement, en termes de contexte, comme je suis en train de le rappeler, la RDC est à la fois ce pays solution qu'on nous montre au niveau international, mais en même temps, ce pays difficulté par rapport au contexte dû au fait que la guerre n'a pas permis, en tout cas au pays, de se développer. Alors, on s'est rendu compte que toujours dans le cadre de ce contexte-là, il y a une discrimination, des stéréotypes, des inégalités entre les sexes qui sont accentuées notamment par certaines pratiques néfastes qui font à ce que la femme court beaucoup de risques, que ce soit au niveau de l'éducation, que ce soit au niveau de son épanouissement. Et c'est ce challenge, dans ce cadre de ce challenge, que les organisations de la société civile ou alors les gouvernements de son côté, ou alors des organisations régionales ou les Nations Unies se battent pour voir si cette tendance peut être renversée et faire en sorte que la RDC reflète effectivement ce qu'on sait de tout, ce que tout le monde sait en termes de potentialités qui peuvent se développer. Alors, par rapport au deuxième point, je voulais évoquer quelques réalisations phares sur l'agenda Femmes, Paix et Sécurité, du côté aussi changement climatique et les rôles des femmes. Pour la RDC, déjà, la résolution du Conseil de sécurité 1325, c'est une grande opportunité Et à côté de ça, au niveau national, on a évolué parce qu'il existe un plan d'action nationale 1325 qu'on appelle le PAN 1325 qui est actualisé de manière participative et inclusive des organisations de la société civile, plus particulièrement les organisations féminines. Et aujourd'hui, je vois qu'il y a une place très, très importante qui est réservée aux jeunes filles. Et ce plan ne se focalise pas seulement au niveau national, il est répercuté dans les provinces. Il y a une province, par exemple, le Nord Kivu, qui n'est pas loin de tous les pays de la East Africa Community que j'ai évoqué, qui est suffisamment impliqué en avance. Je pense que les autres provinces aussi sont en train d'emboîter les pas. Alors, les 4 piliers bien reconnus qui sont répercutés au niveau du PAN 1325, c'est la prévention, la protection, les relèvements économiques, mais aussi la participation. Il y a existence d'un trust fund pour la mise en œuvre du PAN 1325. On sent qu'il y a une mobilisation de tous les acteurs au plus haut niveau pour la mise en place du fonds d'indemnisation des victimes des crimes de masse et des crimes de violences sexuelles liés au conflit. Pour l'instant, la RDC, le gouvernement a adopté un projet de loi qui va fixer les principes fondamentaux relatifs au fonds de réparation en faveur des victimes de violences sexuelles, mais aussi d'autres victimes des crimes de paix. Et ça, c'est un des éléments qu'on attendait du côté de la justice transitionnelle, des mécanismes de justice transitionnelle qui traînent à se développer. Mais les piliers réparation bougent quand même. On espère que si on y arrive, on mettra quand même cette femme au centre, la femme victime, ou je vais dire les victimes de violences sexuelles et d'autres crimes, elles seront au centre, ces victimes seront au centre, en tout cas, du développement de ces fonds spécifiques. Vous avez suivi aussi, mesdames et messieurs, que la loi électorale qui a été révisée en RDC a prévu que tous les partis politiques qui vont aligner 50% des femmes sur leurs listes électorales ne vont pas payer la caution. Pour l'information de celles et ceux qui ne le savent pas, au cours des dernières échéances en 2019, la caution pour chaque candidat ou candidate qui était aligné sur la liste des partis politiques pour être député ou sénateur, la caution était à $1,000 américains. Alors, la nouvelle loi prévoit que si on parvient à aligner 50% des femmes ou plus, automatiquement, cette liste ne paiera pas de caution. Alors là, c'est un défi qui est lancé aux organisations de la société civile qui sensibilisent tous les jours pour que les femmes puissent participer de manière active à la gestion de la chose publique. Le travail vient de commencer davantage parce qu'à défaut d'obtenir la cooptation d'un pourcentage X de femmes, comme il en est le cas dans certains pays de la région, mais là, il faut que les partis politiques comprennent la nécessité d'aligner des femmes aussi pour qu'elles puissent compétir au même titre que les hommes, pour les voir demain assumer des postes de responsabilité au niveau national. Mais le défi reste évidemment celui-là, dû au fait qu'il faut trouver aussi des femmes qui soient capables de compétir à chance égale. Alors, il y a aussi, en plus de la loi qu'on veut voter pour les réparations, il y a ce que nous appelons au niveau national ici les processus FONAREV, le fonds national qui va découler de cette loi, mais qui aura plusieurs sources de financement, notamment les dommages et intérêts ici des procès de masse ou des grands procès où on a condamné les auteurs, les fonds qui viendraient par exemple de la Cour pénale internationale ou des réparations dans certaines affaires comme l'affaire RDC-Ouganda. ou alors d'autres sources importantes au niveau national qui sont mises à contribution. Si ces fonds est créé, c'est sûr que les femmes se sentiraient plus mises en évidence. Mais dans ces opportunités, il y a plusieurs défis qui se présentent. La limite notamment des financements pour la mise en œuvre du PAN, du plan national de mise en œuvre de la résolution 1325, du Conseil de sécurité des Nations Unies. Les budgets jusque-là ne suivent pas vraiment de manière conséquente. La recrudescence des violences liées au conflit et à des crimes de masse, surtout dans la partie est et dans la partie centrale. Les Kasaï restent parmi les provinces qui ont besoin du soutien ou de l'implémentation de ces fonds. Il y a eu beaucoup de femmes qui ont été victimes dans les conflits dits Kamwena-Sapu. Actuellement, vous suivez qu'il y a un conflit qui fait la une entre deux tribus, les Teke et les Yaka. Ça, c'est au centre aussi de la RDC. Et ça nécessite à ce que ces défis puissent être relevés. J'ai épinglé aussi un faible appui technique et financier aux mécanismes alternatifs de règlement des conflits de la justice transitionnelle. Comme vous le savez, là où la justice transitionnelle a évolué, ces mécanismes ont joué un rôle très, très important. Dans le sens qu'il y a le volet vérité et réconciliation qui voudrait à ce que l'on sache pourquoi les crimes sont commis, pourquoi le corps de la femme est utilisé comme champ de bataille, mais que ces gens-là prennent aussi l'engagement de non-répétition des crimes. Et lorsque je prends l'expérience de l'Ouganda avec une organisation Nananti, vous allez vous rendre compte que l'Ouganda a fait des avancées spectaculaires de ce côté-là en développant des cliniques juridiques, ces mécanismes qui permettent au finish, aux victimes à la base d'accéder à des résolutions pacifiques des conflits, mais aussi d'accompagnement en justice sans frais. Il y a un faible appui technique, financier, comme je l'ai évoqué par rapport à ces mécanismes, mais il y a plus une faible participation.
Can I kindly request Mr. Bahiri to conclude within the next 3 minutes? Will it be possible for you to conclude within the next 3 minutes?
Oui, même dans moins de 3 minutes, je suis en train de conclure. Il y a une faible représentation, participation aussi des femmes et des organisations de la société civile au processus de consolidation de la paix. On n'a pas senti les femmes suffisamment la paix alors qu'elles sont plus concernées. Il y a enfin ce qu'on évoque comme faible connaissance de l'utilisation des mécanismes régionaux et internationaux des droits des femmes. Les processus Gender is my agenda, la Cour africaine des droits de l'homme et des peuples ou les conseils économiques et sociaux des Nations Unies. Beaucoup d'organisations de femmes ne maîtrisent pas les processus d'obtention du statut consultatif ou d'observateur, ou alors le processus d'élaboration et de soumission des résolutions ou des rapports alternatifs auprès de ces mécanismes. Donc, ces côtés-là, ces défis, et en termes de recommandations, d'ailleurs, c'est par là que je vais chuter. L'idéal serait de travailler sur l'appui institutionnel et technique pour accompagner ces organisations qui ont fait leurs preuves à hésiter aussi ces mécanismes au niveau régional, au niveau national et international. Mais aussi au niveau national, les doter de capacités importantes, les permettant d'interagir avec le gouvernement et les autres institutions comme les parlements. Merci beaucoup.
Well, thank you very much, Mr. Bahiri, for that very in-depth analysis and presentation. We appreciate hearing your perspectives from the DRC. And now, without taking any more time, I would like to open up the floor for the participants. As I promised when we were starting, this is going to be a participatory, dialogue. Yes, we've spent much more time listening to our experts, but we are also very much interested in hearing what you have to say. So if you have any questions for the panelists, or if you have any comments, kindly put your hand up and we will unmute your microphone so that you can share your thoughts with us. We will use only our 5 to 10 minutes for any questions or comments. Any questions, any comments? A lot has been said, and I was very expectant of what the participants thought, but I guess the speakers were very convincing and hopefully they exhausted everything that needed to be said. Okay, I see Mr. Melat Habtu. Kindly, Pauline, could you allow Mr. Helat Habtu or Miss to have a say? Do I have the rights to unmute them?
They can unmute and speak.
Okay, kindly unmute yourself. Melat?
Yes. Hello, can you hear me?
Yes, we can.
Okay, great. Well, thank you for that. That was very comprehensive and very digestible, and it's been great to kind of understand some of the issues that we face in terms of the topics that the speakers have spoken about. I think in terms of, so my name is Melat, and I am the head of advocacy of the Tigray Youth Network. So predominantly we focus on sexual violence within the Tigray region. And based on what some of the speakers have said, I understand some of the framework has issues in terms of bureaucracy and political will. But in terms of after that has been something that has been, so if we think of a scenario where that has been the framework has been endorsed and there is political will to implement it, don't you feel that there are some of the political leaders that we have within the continent at the moment, even if they do have the superficial will to implement such a framework, there is nothing to hold them to account, or there is no accountability within the continent of each other to be able to make sure that the framework is being implemented in the manner that it should be and in the manner which would deem it to be effective? And if so, what are some of the solutions for that? I don't know if that made sense. Hopefully it did.
Yes, it did. It did. Thank you very much, Melat, and we're very glad to hear your thoughts and questions. We also have some questions or comments in the chat. Caroline says, "Hi everyone, I'm Caroline Okul for Women International. And does someone know any regional networks that focus specifically on gender equality and women rights? If so, could you please provide the name and where it is domiciled?" Thank you. Any other questions, any other comments from our dear participants? And maybe Melat, do you have any particular panelist that you would like to respond to your question? Or is it open?
I think it's open, but I think Professor Sunday was speaking a lot about the region where we focus on predominantly within the Tigray Ethiopia region. So maybe he might have better expertise, but I'm open for anyone to take the question.
Okay, all right, thank you. So I think we will go straight to Professor Sunday to provide a response to Ms. Melat. She asks if there are sufficient accountability mechanisms or systems to be able to hold the leaders accountable in the event that they have not met their commitments. on the CRF?
Thank you very much, Melat, for this question. I talked about political will. I disregarded the word political will and chose to use political bureaucracy instead. I also said that there is quite a lot of political will to make sure that our issues of gender, women, peace, and security are put on the limelight in terms of policy frameworks, in terms of a lot of other things, mechanisms that require women to be representative in all spheres of institutions, laws, society, and so forth, and equity. I mentioned that once we get into the issues of political bureaucracy, it demands implementation. And in the implementation, it demands active participation. It demands allocation of resources so that it can be implemented. It demands technical people, experts. That is where the problem is. And in the corridors of power, in the corridors of implementation, this bureaucracy tend to restrict the framework we're talking about for monitoring. And that is where my problem is. That is where now we don't go far. But everybody would, I assure you, everybody would be willing to be part and parcel of a solution. Today I was reading in the area, I was reading the AU communique to have appointed Obasanjo and Uhuru Kenyatta to lead the peace talks in South Africa. And some women are going to be part and parcel of this. There is political will. But now when it comes to the bureaucratic processes of allocating resources and making sure that this works, it is meager. And in some cases I mentioned, issues of women gender are removed at the last moment from national budgets, and you don't get enough. So it is bureaucratic. It is heavily burdened by bureaucracy. So we have at the national level, we have at the regional, continental level, and then when you go to the local level and visit these refugees where women and children are suffering, it's even so bureaucratic that you have to go through a lot of bureaucratic processes, and yet in the media you would be seeing a lot of will, a lot of concern, a lot of reports that women and children are in these IDP camps, in these refugee camps. And it's not only in the Tigray region, it's everywhere across. I mentioned numbers of countries. You go to Eastern Democratic Republic of Congo, you really agree that a lot of issues of gender-based violence, historically, for the last 2 decades, been topping the agenda, gender-based violence. So it's in conclusion, I would say, yes, the framework has not really gone far. The framework needs to actually go a step ahead. It is an active tool when we need it, and we need to implement it at any level. So that is where I can stop. I don't know if I've answered your question, Melat, but I have my colleagues who probably also have an idea on how to add on to my answers to the question on political will.
Okay, thank you very much, Professor Okello. I see it seems Melat was impressed by the response. So I will give her an opportunity to Ms. Murray. She had her hand up. And then after we will have Mr. Bahati and August sharing their comments or questions. And I kindly request you to keep it to 1 minute so that we can be able to close in time.
Merci beaucoup. Ce n'est pas une question, mais plutôt c'est par rapport à l'observation de Melat sur les mécanismes régionaux de mise en œuvre de la résolution 1325. La CIRGL, la Conférence internationale sur la région des Grands Lacs, nous savons qu'il dispose déjà d'un plan d'action régional sur la mise en œuvre de la résolution 1325. Mais le défi alors devient lequel? C'est que les mêmes États qui ont l'obligation de mettre en œuvre le plan d'action régional, ce sont les mêmes États qui ont l'obligation de mettre en œuvre les plans d'action régionaux. Et là, ça devient justement problématique au niveau soit de l'effectivité de la mise en œuvre des deux plans au même niveau. Voilà, c'est l'élément que je voulais souligner par rapport à la complexité de la mise en œuvre du plan d'action régional pour la CRGL, mais également par rapport au plan d'action régionaux, parce que là, c'est la question de mobilisation des fonds. Mobilisation des fonds pour les plans d'action nationaux et la mobilisation des fonds pour le plan d'action régional et le monitoring, mais aussi la connexion entre les deux plans, le plan d'action régional et les plans d'action régionaux et nationaux plutôt des 12 pays membres de la conférence internationale sur la région des Grands Lacs. Merci.
Thank you very much, Ms. Mary, for that response. Very quickly, Mr. Bahati Rubango, my friend from DRC, we would like to hear from you, and then our guest.
Yes. Bonjour à tout le monde, vous m'entendez? Bonjour, vous m'entendez? Alors, je ne sais pas si vous m'entendez.
Yes, we hear you perfectly well.
Okay, thank you. Alors, je voulais poser une question parce que j'ai bien suivi la présentation des différents panélistes. En tout cas, je salue la pertinence, je salue la qualité de leurs interventions. Le fait qu'ils maîtrisent parfaitement les secteurs en lien avec l'agenda Femmes, Paix et Sécurité. Mais si nous analysons ce cadre d'orientation de l'Union africaine en matière d'agenda Femmes, Paix et Sécurité, on sent effectivement que des interventions qui ont été dites, j'ai suivi Maître Justin par exemple, qui est revenu sur les réalisations majeures au niveau de la RDC. J'ai suivi Madame Concessa qui est aussi revenue sur les réalisations au niveau du Burundi et l'intervenant qui est intervenu au niveau du Sud-Soudan. On sent qu'il y a quand même des efforts qui sont fournis au niveau des différents pays. Mais les organisations de la société civile n'arrivent pas exactement à faire ce qu'on a appelé le suivi, à monitorer et à rapporter au niveau de l'Union africaine. Et c'est là que j'ai posé une question naturellement aux organisateurs comme Women International Peace Center, qui est une organisation vraiment de renom. Comment YPC compte appuyer la société civile pour renforcer sa capacité afin de réaliser exactement le monitoring et le rapportage au niveau des mécanismes régionaux et sous-régionaux. Parce que les instruments, oui, ça existe. Au niveau des différents pays, oui, il y a des efforts qui sont fournis par les OEC, mais il y a cette faiblesse-là en matière de renforcement des capacités, en matière d'interaction, qui ne connaissent pas, par exemple, qu'au niveau du MAC, donc Gender is my Agenda, il y a toute une plateforme qui permet à ce qu'on puisse analyser la situation de la femme et qu'on propose des solutions, qui ne connaissent pas comment on peut soumettre des rapports alternatifs au niveau de la Commission africaine de l'homme et du peuple. On a aussi évoqué les COSOC. Alors, ma question, c'est celle-là exactement. Comment YPC compte appuyer, par exemple, les OEC pour leur doter des capacités nécessaires afin de faire en sorte qu'on puisse mettre en œuvre ce cadre d'orientation de l'Union africaine en matière de l'agenda de femmes, paix et sécurité. Je vous remercie.
Thank you very much, Mr. Rubango Bahati from DRC for your thoughts. Also, I would like to bring your kind attention to a message that has been sent by Ariana in the chat. She requests for some people to interview for her research, which is around the influence of UNSCR 1325+ on the reduction and prevention of conflict-related sexual violence in CAR and DRC. And I think our colleagues from DRC would be very, very helpful, but also our dear panelists kindly support Ariana in attaining the goal of her research. I would now like to invite August to share his comments before we go to the feedback, if any, and closing remarks within the next 3 minutes from our panelists, and we will call it a day.
Rachel, thank you very much. Really appreciate this. And I just want to acknowledge the great work that Professor Sunday is doing with respect to the issues, and especially flagging some of the efforts that are being undertaken so far. Nevertheless, I would still have to disagree with two perspectives. One being his praise of progress being made in South Sudan. I really would love to see where such praise comes from, because the evidence that we have does really not portray any of that. So Professor Sunday, I would be happy to get pointed to your source of optimism as far as progress being made in South Sudan. The second item is political will. I would also love to disagree or like to disagree with Professor, because I think he is calling lip service political will. And I just don't think that's how political will should be framed. Political will is not just about developing the documents. It's not about adopting the new documents. It goes more than that. You invest time, you invest resources, and you pursue those programs using accountability. If at all I want change to happen, I can't just sign the document and go sit, do not release resources. Bureaucracy matters, I understand, but it normally leads to maybe delay in programs, but it should not completely stop programs from working. And so again, I want to register that I disagree with that definition of political will. Political will does not exist. There's lip service, and that is what we have in Africa. And we should not entertain that as political will. Thank you.
I expected indeed that there would be some questions around political will, because I also had my questions, but I think we will carry this conversation in private with Professor Sunday. But I'm very keen to hear what you have to say in response, Professor.
I'm very happy that I stirred up some thoughts here, which is very important. And I like that. It is good, it is healthy. My brother from South Sudan, I'm very happy you brought up two issues. Of course, at least one, you kind of agree with me on these issues of political will. It's a lip service, really, honestly. It's a refined language where now people use at the liberty and it's, get away with it. I don't agree with that. So at least there we agree. Probably my coining of political will as political bureaucracy is a little bit uncalled for right now, but we need to find a description of how we are going to the implementation of this framework. Yeah, it has political will if it is well put together. It has to go all the way up to the implementation and even showing results, outcomes. But it is not there. Yeah, people talk, people do a lot of other things, but then it doesn't bring fruition. It's not satisfactory enough. So thank you for that. And now on the issue of 1325 implementation in South Sudan, I talk from a point of experience. I've been working in South Sudan for years and years. At least, I would say if I go back to December before, maybe in 2011, 2013, up to 2013 before the war started, and after that, the threshold to make sure that the parliamentarians reach 35% in parliament, at least it was achieved. That's a fact. I was there. I was working also closely with parliamentarians, and at the time, the president's office, I reviewed some of those documents. In representation, there were at least 35% of women representation in parliament. A number of changes have taken place, partly because of the war and after the IGAD peace processes. There is a decline However, the ambition is that they should be increased from 35 to 40, or even a half, but it has not been there. That aspiration is what I'm referring to, and at least that 35% had been reached. Now, generally speaking, it is declining. Even Rwanda, that was half-half. I think it is also declining. Uganda is coming up in the new government, in the new parliament, where women, decision makers and political representatives, ministerial positions are widely represented. And if you look at Uganda in the election monitoring, election system, there is always a woman MP from each constituency, which is elected into the House of or the Parliament. So at least, you know, those are examples I could give. Others have gone up, others are going down. South Sudan is going down for so many reasons. If I look at Central African Republic, it's almost zero. I don't know if there is anybody from Bangui here. DRC is actually trying very hard to come up. Ethiopia, yes, the first president is a woman. But underneath, there's so many, so few. If you look at the pillars on decision-making positions for women, there are very few, but again, in businesses, chief executives, they are coming up. So that is as far as I can say. My brother from South Sudan, and together with our other panelists, we can exchange contacts. I'm very much into this work, and we can take it further. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Oh my goodness, I do apologize that we have exceeded our time by 7 minutes, but we are, I'm just going to give 1 second, 5 seconds realistically to our panelists to kindly close and share any last remarks. And indeed, the key, one of the key points of having this conversation is so that we can build those collaborations to work together and share notes so that we can ensure that the work which we are doing is life transforming and meaningful in the communities or even in our countries where we are. So kindly, I'll start with Mr. Ibrahim to kindly share your closing remarks in 5 seconds.
Yeah, thank you so much. Let me appreciate the colleague panelists for the very useful insights they've provided in terms of progress, in terms of lessons learned, and in terms of challenges also in using the CRF as a monitoring and reporting framework. The experiences in South Sudan, Burundi, and which other country are not unique, are not peculiar to these countries. Across the continent, we also face the same challenges. But what I want to say, the CRF is a fairly new framework. We are still, as national governments, as countries, trying to understand the framework. As I speak, even with us in Sierra Leone, even though we've reported, but at the national level, yes, for us at the Ministry of Gender and Children's Affairs, it's obvious that we'll understand the tools. But how about the colleagues from the other ministries, for the other sectors? So there is still a lot we have to do in terms of building capacity for using the tool effectively as a monitoring and reporting tool. I want to also, as appealed by Prof, we'll continue the conversation. We'd love to share contacts so that the experiences are enriching, that we can learn so much from each other, not just from this session, but the discussion will continue. I want to thank the organizers also for giving me this opportunity. Thank you.
Thank you. Could we kindly have Ms. Murray give your last remarks, please? In 5 seconds.
Oh, merci beaucoup. C'est juste, c'était par rapport au remerciement sincère aux organisateurs. Tout ce que je peux dire, c'est qu'il faut quand même prendre le lead en tant que société civile. Nous avons été interpellés pour faire des évaluations internes mais aussi collaborer avec les institutions, spécifiquement ici je vais parler du ministère du genre, dans le monitoring de la mise en œuvre de la R1325. Et comme nous sommes dans le plaidoyer, il faut aussi s'assurer que justement les différents acteurs, les différentes institutions, les ministères sectoriels sont engagés à la contextualisation et à l'intégration de l'agenda femmes dans leur politique et leur stratégie et leur planification. Merci beaucoup.
Thank you very much, Ms. Murray. Let's kindly have Dr. Agustino. And after Dr. Agustino, we'll have Professor Sunday, and lastly, Mr. Justin Bahire.
Thank you very much, colleagues. It's been an enlightening afternoon. I really appreciate the exchange, and I'm pleased to have attended this and listened to all of you. I would like to reemphasize the importance of localized indicators, that if we really want to promote the women and peace and security agenda, we need to localize those regional and continental frameworks, so then they are better understood and evaluated. I would also like to call upon all of us to maybe build a network of researchers and develop those indicators to support individual countries. I'll leave it at that. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Professor Sunday?
Mine is very brief. Let us improve the framework and include traditional mechanisms of monitoring women, peace, and security into the current framework. It leaves a number of women out there who are under traditional sets of operations, and they're not monitored. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Finally, my brother from DRC, Mr. Bahire. Mr. Bahire Ibrahim? Justin, sorry. Okay, I guess maybe our brother dropped off. I would like to thank each and every one of you for your time participating in this workshop. Thank you for your questions from wherever you joined. I see Esther, I see Animu, I see Ariana, I see Melat, Kitenge, Barudike, Joseph, Agatha, and some who have already dropped off. Thank you very much. Alet, thank you for joining us today. And indeed, the conversation continues. For now, I will wish you a good evening. Bye.
Thank you, everyone. Bye-bye.
Bye-bye. Thank you.